If you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you might know that I interviewed Keela Rose Calloway for episode 4 back in 2020. She'd been a feature on the Black Expat website and had previously shared her experiences going from a future lawyer to a stand-up comedian in Vietnam. Yes, that's a stretch, I know. So if you haven't heard that episode or read our article, I encourage you to do so. After the interview, though, she mentioned another fellow comedian who was living in Saigon, who she thought would be a great fit for this show. Naturally, as you can imagine, I was intrigued because, quite honestly, beyond her, I didn't know any stand-up comedians, much less another person living in Vietnam. And this is how I was introduced to JK Hobson. JK, who was born in Puerto Rico and raised in New York, was a longtime Los Angeles resident before moving to Southeast Asia. In addition to creating comedic content under the banner of Asia Out Loud, he was also the host of the Outsiders podcast and the co-host of We Out Here Expat podcast. And while all of this is certainly interesting, I'm going to go ahead and say that this episode is full of random musical trivia, unexpected turns, and a ridiculous amount of laughter. Well, at least more than normal. Because JK has had one of the craziest career pivots I've ever seen. And I'm a professional counselor and career strategist. I mean, we're talking going from a death metal guitarist to a Fulbright scholar to a comedian. Crazy, right? In this episode, JK shares his reflective thoughts on identity, colorism, and acceptance. He also walks us through his love affair with metal and punk and the ways music dominated his life for a good long while. And he also shares how his comedy translates in an incredibly diverse context. So how does a metalhead process after their band breaks up following a successful tour? Well, that's what you get to find out soon. And as a quick note, the language might be a little spicy for some listeners. And if you have kids around, you might want to put on some earbuds. Welcome to the Global Chatter. All right, so we're back with another episode of the Global Chatter, and I am excited. That word gets overused every time I introduce someone, but I am excited because I already know the conversation is going to be fire. Also, I say that about every episode. So,
I feel so special already.
You should feel incredibly special. If you listen to the intro, you know that I've got JK Hobson with me, who I was actually introduced to his work about 2 years ago. And so I am excited that he is on this show today because obviously it's taken me 2 years to get it together. So JK, welcome to the Global Chatter.
Thank you. And thank you for that warm welcome. You were introduced to my work. I was like, damn, I have work. All right. I've never heard it put that way before.
You know what? It's really funny when someone does your intro because sometimes you're like, this is the stuff they'll be reading at my funeral. And then she did this. And then she did that. And she was also known for it. So it's really weird. I feel you.
Be looking down from the ethers like, well, I did all this shit. Okay.
Right. Exactly. Cool. No, but it's true because to be very honest, I feel like when you are doing a lot of things, you don't know the impact of what you're doing. And then when someone else recognizes it, that's kind of the moment that you go, I'm just not like in this wheel of life doing things. Like I'm actually doing recognizable things. So wow. I want to give you your props.
Wow. Thank you so much. That feels good. I'm going to accept that. I will accept those props.
Yes. In 2022, that's what we do. We accept and celebrate. So I like to ask people just from the beginning, because obviously it's a Global Chatter and only in one case have I been in the same space as someone I'm interviewing. So where in the world are you currently located?
I am currently in the Bintan district of Saigon, which most of the world knows as Ho Chi Minh City. The name was changed in 1975 from the original name Saigon, but everybody down here calls it Saigon, so I call it Saigon. And that's in Vietnam.
And because it's at the time of recording cold here, although it's February. It's going to be 72 today. I like to know, what's the weather? What's it like? Is it warm? Is it cold? Is it hot? Rainy?
It was hot today. It was really hot. I
Like
wore,
when you say hot, like how hot?
it was like I want to say it was in the high 80s. They do Celsius down here, which I still haven't wrapped my brain around. So I never really know exactly what it is,
Right.
but it was in the
Yeah.
high 80s, and it's humid as well. And I was in the shade. I wore all black today by accident, which is like, that's a whole other thing. And I was sitting in the shade, sipping on a coconut, and I was still like, yo, it's mad hot today. I was sweating. Yeah. So it was a burner. And it's February,
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. It's dry season now. There's 2 seasons in Vietnam. There's wet season and dry season. I much prefer dry season because I don't like driving on a motorbike in the rain, but it gets hot. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think for anyone who's lived kind of in the southern part of the world, those tend to be the most common seasons, right? It's either people are like, either it's hot and it's dry, or it's hot and humid and it's wet, right?
Right.
So because in Cameroon, we'd have like dry and rainy season. It seems like it's the same thing you have down in Vietnam.
Yeah.
So let's kind of start from the beginning. I always like to set the scene and give the context of people's lives. So where were you born and raised? Where did you grow up?
So I was born in Puerto Rico. I was born in Puerto Rico in the early 70s. And then we moved to New York City, to Brooklyn, when I was just 2 weeks short of being 2 years old. So I have like a fuzzy memory of Puerto Rico before we went, but I grew up in New York. I grew up in New York City. I lived in Crown Heights, Brooklyn. And then when I was about 5, we moved to Flushing, Queens. And then I moved back to Crown Heights, lived in Harlem for a while, Sunnyside, Queens, Spider-Man's neighborhood. I lived in the West Village, back to Brooklyn, mostly Brooklyn, Manhattan, and Queens.
So I'm curious, though, having been born in Puerto Rico, did you go back as a child? Did you ever have an opportunity to go back and forth as a child, or were you pretty much settled in New York once your family got there?
No, yeah, we used to go back a lot. So my mother's Puerto Rican, my dad's from New York. He's Jamaican from New York. My grandparents on his side are from Jamaica. They immigrated in the 30s. But we would go back like every couple of years, we would go. And then like when I became an adult, I would go back infrequently, like maybe 3 years or something, every 3 years or something. And then since I've left New York, I've gone back, like I left in 2000. I moved to LA in 2000. And then I would go back every few years. I've been back once since I moved to Vietnam, and I plan to go back again in the summertime. All the things with COVID, with
right. Well, I mean, COVID just, I don't want to talk about COVID.
Oh, we don't have to talk about COVID. We don't have to talk about it.
Oh my God. And the impact on travel.
Yeah.
But so here's where I'm fascinated, because obviously growing up in New York, there are strong immigrant communities. There are strong Caribbean identities. There's a strong Puerto Rican community. When you were going back to Puerto Rico, I assume that you were hanging out with family and cousins and all of that sense. Mm-hmm. What was sort of that dynamic? Because I'm always interested when folks are like immigrant, like, and I say I'm using immigrant loosely, right? But when they have kind of these cross-cultural stories, what is it like to go back to the old country or, the family space, and compared to being in the States or where you were living?
Well, I would say like my Spanish is not amazing. So that's the whole thing. So there's always like, I'm very nice in Spanish, because when you don't speak a language really well, like all you could be is nice. You know what I'm saying? So that's right. That's my personality in Spanish is nice. But the family dynamic, I think when I was a kid, I mean, it was just like, oh, everybody's like, well, here's this nice kid. Then when I got older, it became like, especially when I was doing the band, it was like, he's, just this interesting person, and let's hear his stories and stuff like that, But it's interesting because we were talking about a little bit about this before the break, is I wasn't like particularly close with my grandmother, who's my mother's mother, and she's dead now. So I don't want to speak ill of the dead, but there's always this, when I see all like I just saw Encanto the other day,
Uh-huh.
which is set in Colombia. And, when I think of stuff like Coco and all, and, just every single stereotype of just like grandma used to do, or, grandma's just like this. And we weren't close, and we didn't. And,
Yeah.
and I think it had to do with, colorism, because I'm her first grandson. My father's black. My mother does not really present as black. She's, she's something, but she's light skinned. But I never felt that acceptance, from my grandmother. And I never put my finger on why it was until like very late in life. Like I was in my 30s when I was back. I was at her house. My mother was taking care of her when she got really old, my grandmother, even though my mother and her didn't even get along either. But it was just like, I got to take care of this person. It's like that filial piety, And, but I remember being in her house and looking around, and looking at all the pictures and seeing all the pictures of my younger cousins, like my younger light-skinned cousins, And then I was like, there are no pictures of me in this house. Like that my mother didn't put there. You know what I'm saying? Like my grandmother had pictures of my cousins. There were no pictures of me. And I was like, wow. Okay. Wow. I mean, I didn't even get mad at first. I was just like, wow. And then I thought about it later on and I got mad. And that was a whole situation. That's a whole story. That's a whole podcast of like me sort of coming to terms with and sort of making peace with my grandmother, and just realizing that I had to love her as much as I could while she was here. And then her eventually actually responding to that. That's a whole story. Wow. But all that is to say, so, I think I felt a little bit like alien and never really figured out why. I love going to Puerto Rico. I love hanging out there. I love hanging out with my mom. I love my family down there. But I think that that probably kept me from establishing a deeper connection than I did.
Wow. And I'm curious, and this may be a no, but on your father's side, with them having Jamaican roots, did you ever go to Jamaica?
Yeah. I went to Jamaica a few times, a couple of times in my childhood, and then in my adulthood. I haven't gotten back there like nearly enough. I still talk to my cousins. It's funny because my cousins in Jamaica, we're really close in that kind of way. Like if we don't see each other and then we see each other, like we pick up where we left off, So that's really cool. Yeah, I'm probably closer to them than a lot of my family that I see more often. Which I don't know how that could be. I think we're just closer vibe wise, But yeah, I've been to Jamaica and I love it there. Yeah,
because I think you had a really, and it's hard to say observation because this is the life that you lived, but it's interesting to sort of see the dichotomy between one side of the family and recognizing that colorism, which, you and I were talking offline, is something that unfortunately it's a feature in a lot of societies. So this is not picking on a region. Legacy of colonialism, legacy of what we understand as white supremacy, legacy of all these things and the aftermath, and pitting tribes against each other, but that is another podcast.
That's a whole podcast.
That's a whole, like, my thoughts on that.
Right.
Although I think I work my thoughts on that in every episode, whether it's called for or not. But, I think it's interesting sort of seeing that from that lens, and then seeing kind of the dynamic and the relationship with your Jamaican family. And I wonder if, not that, and I assume that there is also colorism in Jamaican societies, because why wouldn't it be? But it seems like it wasn't as much of an issue, at least with the family members you got close to on that side. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, we're all black.
Right. That's what I mean.
So it's like, what I mean?
Right.
It's a good meeting point. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah.
Yeah. It is. I think the funny thing about colorism, though, is that, not to belabor this point, but you could legitimately have people who are all black, right? You could, but depending on where you fall on that chart,
Yeah.
Right.
That's the real thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Not only do how outsiders may treat a group of Black and or brown people, but also how Black and brown people treat each other based on the fact that you darker or lighter and like this is supposed to matter. I mean, to me, it'll always be one of the weirdest things that humans do. Is just be like, oh, you happen to look sienna as opposed to like, you know, burnt brown. Therefore, you get different teeth.
Yeah. It's like white people. No, hold on for the racism. We got this. We can do this ourselves.
Right.
We can be fucked up on our own. You know, we don't need.
Right.
We do everything.
We don't need assistance. We can do this.
Right.
And I've seen it and been in Black and brown countries where I'm just like, this is so ridiculous. And I recognize that in some spaces. The only reason I haven't gotten much of it is because of the passport I held. I do recognize that because there's privilege there. But so if we take your story back to New York, so what did you decide to do? So you're going to school, you're growing up, you're doing your thing, you hit your teenage years, and then what's your plan? Going to college, going somewhere else, doing something different? You're shaking your head.
I did not have a plan. I had no plan. And I think because I had no plan, I started to kind of check out with school. You know, I went into high school wanting to draw comic books because I loved comics. Loved like all that Marvel stuff that's happening now. That was like, I was growing up in what they call the golden age of comics, when you had like comics like the X-Men tackling issues like race in this very clever way. And I was just like, I was in that world, and I ended up going to the High School of Art and Design, which is in east side of Manhattan, a few blocks from the Forbidden Planet, which is a famous comic book shop. I was in there like every single day. Me and my friends were, you know, that was like our world. So I went in for that. And then and it was a very racially diverse school where it was like, we had everybody in there, you know, I mean, everybody's from New York, everybody's New Yorkers. But like, if you see my pictures, and I didn't really even think that much of it, you know, in high school. And then when I go back and look at the pictures, it's like, wow. Or when I show people pictures of my friends and I in high school, they're like, wow, and y'all were all hanging out like that. It's like, yeah, you know, I mean, later on, you know, when I think the political climate started getting more divisive, I think a lot of the white folks I knew showed their asses a bit. Like when Trump got, you know, I feel like then things got kind of weird. But at the time when we were kids, I mean, to my, you know, the way that I felt about it, you know, it seemed like very eclectic, and I liked that about it. But then because of that, I became exposed to a lot of things that, you know, that I didn't really know about before, which is like, music, for example. Like I went to high school with this kid, Evangelos, and I was always like the sound of guitars, you know, like when Run DMC came out, and, you know, and they started putting like hard guitars on their songs. It was always like, ooh, you know, or LL Cool J had some songs with, you know, and I was like, you know, I like the sound of that, you know. And then, but when I got into high school, somehow I was talking to this kid about that, and he was like, oh, you should listen to that. And he would make me mixtapes of different metal bands, you know. And I'd be like,
I used to make many a mixtape. I have made many in high school.
Yeah.
It's a lost art. Now you can share playlists, but I'm like, no. It's love to actually spend time recording a song from either a record or a CD or the radio, however you can do it.
Yeah.
But yeah, wow.
It's a real labor of love, you know? So this kid was just constantly like, basically catering it to what my tastes were. And basically it just went heavier and heavier until like we got to Metallica. And that's when Metallica was like in the early mid to late 80s. That's when they were at their, like, you know, they were making, that was at the pinnacle of their, you know, of their creativity. And that was just like, once I got to Metallica, I was like, okay, so this is my shit now, you know? And then I was like going on my own and going to shows, and I didn't really know a lot of people into metal, you know?
Yeah.
And, you know, my black friends would make fun of me. You know, they were still my friends. I wasn't a lot of black metalheads would be like, you know, well, well, my black friends turned their backs on me. So now, so I still have black friends. They just made fun of me for listening to metal. And I was like, that, that's fine. Cause I really stood my ground. Cause I was like, no, this music is fucking dope.
Yeah.
So, but that's when, that became like, and then when I was 15, my mother bought me a guitar for Christmas. And I started teaching myself how to play guitar. And then that was just my thing. I went to school, but I was super checked out, graduated late, went to college, didn't care about it, just wanted to play music. That was like the one thing that I was sure about.
I always like to ask, especially when I get to music, I'm very curious. So 15, 16, 17, maybe even 18-year-old you, what bands were speaking to you at that time?
Metallica. There was like the whole Bay Area thrash thing. Then I started getting into like punk and hardcore. So like the Misfits and Leeway and the Cro-Mags. Let me see, 18. I guess Fugazi, Voivod. Who else did I like? Quicksand was around that. So it went from like metal, but then metal is like, there's so much like Dungeons and Dragons-ness to like a lot of the stuff.
Right.
Which was never my, and I played Dungeons and Dragons when I was a kid, but I was like, nah, this is like, I like music about real shit. You know what I mean? Which is, I like that about a lot of the thrash bands, because they were influenced by punk, and it wasn't that like, it wasn't that operatic, so then I started getting more into hardcore, or like bands that were a mix between metal, because hardcore was like, it was like music from the street, people talking about their actual lived reality, not this fantastical stuff. So that really appealed to me, but I did like the musicality of metal. So that's how it became like more crossover, like Leeway. I mentioned Corrosion of Conformity, who started in the punk scene. They became kind of more metal later on. Great band. The Voivod, who was like they were a little bit fantastical, but they talked about science fiction. So it was like, they used science fiction as like the backdrop for like creating a lot of metaphors about present day life. And, so it was basically like metal, but from the street, about reality. That's what I was into.
At what point did you make the transition in terms of getting into a band, or were you in a band while you were in college, or where did you go from?
Yeah, I was in like 3 or 4 bands when I was in college. So it took a lot of my time and my attention. It's probably why I got kicked out. I just checked out. I stopped going to class, and I just was practicing and playing shows with bands. I started playing shows in the city with my band. So I was in a bunch of bands, but then I joined this one band, and we're doing original music, and I was really finding my own voice as a musician. And what we were doing was something we were doing like psychedelic hardcore metal, if that makes sense. Okay. It was really like, like when I heard Tool later on, I was like, that was like the closest thing. Like, this is kind of like what we're trying to do, like tribal, but we also had electronics in there. It was really original. And I sang and played guitar for that band. And so for the first time as a singer, I started thinking a lot about a lot of things that I hadn't considered before. Like I grew up non-religious, and that experience trying to figure out what I was about, I became like intensely aware and even spiritual, even though I didn't have a spiritual practice. I made up my own religion. I created my own religion. And then I went crazy. But within that, though, is I found my own voice, musically. And then I just kept playing. Then I ended up playing drums in a band and a couple of bands. I decided that I wanted to learn every instrument because I wanted to be able to, like if I wrote a song, I wanted to be able to, hey, play this like this. I wanted to know how to do everything. So I taught myself guitar, bass, and drums. I even recorded demos where I played all the instruments. But then after I kind of came down off the spiritual trip, I had like alienated myself and a lot of people, and I was just kind of like trying to find, and I got really depressed a couple of times. And I sort of like, was really kind of lost in New York for like a couple of years in my 20s. And then I started to kind of like pull myself together. And then I joined Crisis, which was a band that started in 93. And I was a fan of the band for years. I would go see Crisis. Okay. And Crisis is one of the only bands that I ever saw. And wasn't just like, I like this band. It was like, I should be in this band. Like I literally thought that while I was watching them. Like I would be a really good addition to this band. I even met them a couple of times. I never I never proposed that, but I met them. And then years later, I had started an all black hardcore band, and it had my buddy Mike singing from No Redeeming Social Value, Dre Lockdown from Warzone and No Redeeming Social Value. These are shout outs. This guy, Walter. And it was good and it was fun. Then Mike left and I was singing and playing guitar, but it was really difficult for me to lead the band, because I was super serious about it and music, and people were at different phases in their lives and, varying degrees of intensity and dedication. So Mike, who had left, was like, oh, you should just join an already established band. Stop trying to start a band. You should just join a band that's already. And I was like, oh, like just fucking walk into a band, right? I was like sarcastic about it. He was like, yeah, you can do it. And then 2 weeks later, I saw an ad in the Village Voice that said, band with influences including Black Sabbath, the Melvins, and Acid Bath seeks second guitar player. And I was like, oh, that's right up my alley. I'm like, I like those bands. So then I called up, and when I called up, the answering machine, because I'm sure you remember those, said, leave all messages for Crisis. And I hung up the phone. I was like, what the fuck? It's Crisis. Because again, it was this weird, it was like one of my favorite local bands, So anyway, so I called them up, and long story short, I ended up joining the band like within a few weeks. And then within a month or two, we were touring the East Coast, mostly. And then that was in 98. And then we moved to LA in 2000 to get a record deal. The band had 3 albums out already, and then got out of the record deal, and then we're looking for another one. So I joined in between record deals, and then it took us a couple of years to secure the right one, and then we came out with the band's 4th and final album so far in 2004.
I mean, nostalgia is a big thing. You could probably get the band back.
Yeah, I thought it's possible. The band broke up for like personal reasons, which is like that had nothing to do with me or very little. So it's like there would have to. It could happen. It could happen, but it's not up to me. There was a relationship that dissolved within that band, like an intense romantic relationship that dissolved, and as a result, the band broke up. So you can't, it's difficult to be like, hey, just,
I mean, Fleetwood Mac made it.
They did.
And there were two. There were two. And one of them wrote a whole song about someone else.
That was raw.
I'm sorry. Rumors. Yeah. Thinking back to the 70s, but Rumors is one of my favorite albums.
It's so messy.
But it is like amazingly messy though. Like we benefited.
Wow. I didn't know you felt like that. You want to put that in a song? Because that could sound really good. All right,
right. Right. Yeah. And I keep thinking to myself, you wrote a whole song about somebody else while married to someone. But yeah, I mean, wow. So how long were you in Crisis?
From still the band. I was in Crisis from 98 until the band broke up in 2005. So 7 years.
So I guess here's my question. You were in a band, you guys were touring, you were doing your thing. What happens when your band breaks up and you're no longer in the band?
It's really bad. You get really depressed. You become very sad because you go.
I'm like, what do you do?
Because literally, we broke up the day after we got back from the biggest tour we ever did.
Oh, wow. What a high and what a low. Jeez.
We toured with this band, Exodus, which Exodus is the band that Kirk Hammett from Metallica was originally in, right? They're a Bay Area thrash band.
Right.
Gary Holt, who played in Exodus, is in Slayer now, which is like one of the most popular metal bands of all, you know what I mean?
Right.
So we were like really, you know, starting to break some ground. And then like the day after we got off tour, it was like, yeah, this is probably not ever happening again. And it's like, what? So wait, I got to go back to work at my regular ass job and repeat that ad nauseum for like forever? What the, you know what I mean?
So what do you do? What do you do?
So
what do you decide to do?
I went to my job. I was like, I don't want to be in a band ever again because this hurts too much.
What
I was
job
working
was
in the
it?
casino
Wait,
gaming
what job
industry.
Was it?
I was working where they just had the Super Bowl with Snoop and Dr. Dre. They had that where it used to be the Hollywood Park racetrack. And I used to work in Hollywood Park Casino and Crystal Park Casino in Compton. And yeah, and I just went back to work and I was like, I don't want to be in bands anymore. I started making sad electronic music, down tempo, trip hop. And just, because I could control that. I couldn't control what other people were going to do, but I could control this sequencing software and these samples. I was sampling like we were talking about before and making this music and trying to figure out and just regrouping, you know, and it took me a couple of years.
So you've gone back to the regular job, and how long did you stay there? Kind of what was next for you? Did you, make a switch? Like, at what point did you go from where you were to getting to abroad for the first time?
So I'll try to make it quick. Is that while I was doing that job, I was like, I cannot do this ad nauseum for the rest of my life. They're paying me a pretty okay amount of money, so it makes me scared to quit.
Yeah.
But like, I can't do this. I started practicing Buddhism also and just realizing, in Buddhism, we say never build your happiness on the misfortune of others. And I realized that that's exactly what the casino gaming industry is. It's an industry that builds itself on the misfortune of others. So I was like, I got to get out of here. So eventually I started taking classes in a community college, like slowly, like taking a class at a time. And then I ended up losing my job, which panicked me tremendously for like an hour. And then I went home and chanted. I chant Nam Myoho Renge Kyo in the mornings and evenings. I chanted right before this interview. And then after I chanted, it was like, oh, wait, no, this is exactly what's supposed to happen. Like, I have to leave this job. So I'm going to register for school full time and I'm going to figure it out. And I ended up getting offered a job like within that month where I could make residual income, where it's just like kind of doing stuff from the internet, like moving some products around, legal stuff, but, and doing that.
Because you had to
clarify.
Sorry, you had to clarify. Because the internet,
you know what I'm saying? He's moving products, huh? I heard you talking about Colombia earlier.
You're moving weight.
Yeah.
I'm pretty much, I said moving weight to someone and they looked at me and I went, wait.
Yeah.
The way I was like, I'm sorry. I forgot the connotation.
I didn't know that had any other connotation at all.
I was like,
yeah. So I went back to school and at this time I'm in my 30s. So I'm like making it count. It's not like when I was in my 20s, I didn't know. Like I've seen what it's like out there. You know what I'm saying? So I really pushed myself. And then I ended up getting into a 4-year school. And I ended up pursuing global studies. I was really inspired by my mentor, Daisaku Ikeda, really try to understand the world and its interconnectedness and how to make it a better place. And so I pursued global studies as my major. And then within that, I won a scholarship to study history, Vietnamese history in Vietnam. So I came to Vietnam in 2015 to study Vietnamese history, and I did, and I fell in love with Vietnam. I was like, I gotta come back here. You know, I didn't want to even leave. So I went back for my last year of university, and as it turned out, the application for the Fulbright scholarship was due like 3 weeks after I got back to the States. So I applied like immediately, got all my letters of rec. And by the next February, I found out that I'd be coming back to Vietnam on a Fulbright scholarship, for a year.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Oh my God. How, so I guess I'm trying to figure out, and I think it's really interesting with your educational trajectory, because too often we think 18 to 25-year-olds need to have it figured out, right? And they haven't had a lot of life experience. And sometimes they just don't know. And I say this as someone who works in higher ed, so I see this daily. But I'm trying to, and it's crazy to see how the pieces are connected, but what made you in that initial moment even choose to go to Vietnam? Was it just an opportunity to get out of the country? Or was it just, this seems like a very cool initiative? Like, what was even drawing you there? Was there a religious aspect of it? Like, why Vietnam as opposed to anywhere else?
So you know how they talk about that the United States is politically very polarized, right? Like, especially right now. I mean, you got people who love Trump and, you know, whatever, right? Yeah. So in studying history, I started to kind of trace back the chain of causality in modern history. And it seemed to me that a lot of this polarization started in the 60s, right? And it was the two major issues then were the civil rights era, the civil rights struggle, and the Vietnam War, right? Like you had people that were
Cold
right.
War.
It was, so it was like people that were for the war, like, you know, it's just like kind of amazing that they got people on board with this shit. And those are the same people that elected Trump. Those are the same people that were against civil rights. You know what I'm saying? And then you had people that were against the war and they were pro civil rights. So I started to see that this chain of causality, like I mean, obviously there have been a lot of problems in the United States for a long time, but in modern history, that was a huge shift. But then I started thinking, well, it's kind of unfair to view the Vietnam War as just something that happened to the people of the United States. It wasn't even fought here, you know? So I got curious as to the way it affected these people in Vietnam. And the people that, by the way, won the war was like the only people to have won a war. And this country is like a third world country. So I became very curious. So then when I heard about this opportunity to study history in Vietnam, I was like, yeah, I'm going to do that. And actually I won the Gilman scholarship that initially it was supposed to pay for half of the program. But once they heard my story, they paid for the whole thing, which was like unheard of. Like nobody on my campus had ever won that much from a Gilman scholarship. Nobody had won a Fulbright either. So it was a bunch of firsts. So yeah, so when I got the opportunity to come, like I knew that it was such a tremendous benefit, you know, so I really dug in.
And I definitely am going to put this in the show notes, because having worked in higher ed, study abroad, all of that stuff, Gilman and Fulbright, those are major things to win. And especially when I think about first gen, underrepresented, all of those groups, like those are such great scholarships. And so, yeah, no, that's amazing that you got that funding, because for any of us, I think especially if you're thinking about going abroad and the financial component, to have a reason to also have it tied to your purpose and what you're studying and to have things covered, that's such a clear pathway. And so what was your impression? I assume that Vietnam, when you got there, at least for the first time, you'd never been to Asia, or had you been to Asia?
I had gone to Japan. Crisis did a show, played a festival in Tokyo in 2005, but that's Tokyo. You know what I mean? And we were there for like 3 days. I mean, it was amazing. And I was like blown away.
Yeah.
But definitely didn't spend enough time. So I had been to Asia. So when I came to Vietnam, like my only frame of reference was Japan. So I was like, and Tokyo's nice, but it's not like people are warm there. You know what I'm saying? It's not like it's a very contained place. And I just thought that was just like an Asian thing, And then when I came to Vietnam and it was like tropical and people are loud and people are posted up on little plastic chairs, drinking beers and eating a lot of food that reminded me of Puerto Rican food. And I was like, and lively. Yeah. I was like, oh, wow, this is like, I really vibe with this, It's the humidity also. I felt very at home, Yeah.
I think you've made some really interesting points because I think especially if you look at Vietnam and you're coming from an American perspective, the struggle is there's an image which is through the lens of war, right? But there's not an understanding of there's a modern Vietnam, right? And there's a story before the war and there was a story after the war and there's a story that continues. And I wonder this, and you seem to have always run in diverse circles, but even when you were saying that you were going to Vietnam, did you find people, at least in the States, were like, well, why are you going? Or there's nothing there. Like, did you get any pushback or was it just more that people were like, oh, that's cool?
No, I got some people. I mean, no shade, but I mean, people think of Vietnam as a war. So first of all, I had these neighbors, my neighbors when I lived in Riverside, which is where I went to university, just like some homies, like, Mexican cats, and we would just, talk about football and beer and I don't follow football, but I drink beer. So we kick it, and they were cool guys, not educated dudes, but, and I remember I told them, I was like, yo, I'm going to Vietnam. And they're like, so homie, you getting deployed? I was like, deployed? Like, wait.
The war ended like
50 years ago, like 40 years at this time.
Now like 40,
yeah.
Right?
I was just like, okay. And then I'll never forget the nurse, the study abroad nurse is like the nurse that has to make sure you get all the shots.
Yeah.
She was like, it's fine that you're going to Vietnam, but I don't know why all these people or kids are trying to go abroad when you live in America. We got so many great things in America. Have you been to Colorado? I was like, woman, if you don't get on, I mean,
full disclosure, I have been to Colorado and it's beautiful.
It's beautiful, but it's different from going to another culture. Colorado's the most beautiful place in the United States.
Colorado, though. Because she really could have said some other states and I'd have been like, and that's why we're leaving, because Indiana.
Have you been to Salt Lake City?
Dakotas.
Have you been to Toledo, Ohio?
Well, no, I've heard Utah's beautiful though, but like Arkansas, we pushing a lot.
I've been to 48 out of 50 states. I'm good. I want to knock Hawaii and Alaska. I'll take it off the bucket list, but I'm good. So good.
Have you been to Colorado?
Yes. Colorado it was the most beautiful place I had ever seen before I came to Vietnam. It was like just the mountains and, but it's also like, it's just about like, I want to get out of here. I want to see how other people are living.
Right.
And no offense to you, lady.
Right.
But this is one of the reasons I want to leave. You know what I'm saying? It's just this small.
And also, it's study abroad. So you're going to see all the kids that want to get. Mm-hmm. But that's another story. Let's not put that
together. No, we can talk about that. There's a lot. There's a lot to unpack here.
Like. That can be the outtakes if you want to hear my thoughts on people not knowing their job accurately. But that's another thing. So how long have you been in Vietnam currently? Like,
I've been here for almost, it's going to be in May, it'll be 6 years. No. Sorry.
Okay,
in June,
so always a question. Yeah. Okay, because that was 30 days.
This is very important. This is going to be on the test, right?
Right. It's like, what is that? But here's always, a thing that I think people always wonder. So you went out, you got the Fulbright. Long story short, you're still in Vietnam. from a career standpoint, how did you end up staying there? Like what opportunities were open to you? Or were you the kind of person where, we've got people who are content creators who they're entrepreneurs. We have people who are educators. Like what was it that you found that you were able to do to kind of sustain yourself living in Vietnam?
After the Fulbright, I was teaching English, and I found that was a way to sustain myself and give myself enough free time so that I could discover Vietnam. I could do some traveling in Southeast Asia, kind of find my footing. Yeah, get comfortable. Because that's the thing about when you live in a place like this is that you can, with 20 hours a week working, you can sustain a living. You can even save some money, while you have all this free time to do this other stuff. So within that's when I started kind of pursuing this thing that I had been interested in, that I had tried a couple of times, which is stand-up comedy. And so I began, although I had performed a couple of times while I still lived in the States, I began performing regularly, like right after the Fulbright scholarship. And so I was in a remote area called My Tho in the Mekong Delta, which is about 2 hours away from Saigon. And I would come to Saigon like on the weekends, to check it out, to kind of check out what the scene was like. And then after the Fulbright, I moved to Saigon permanently. And then I quickly fell into the stand-up comedy scene and started performing regularly. Yeah. And then since then, I got a better teaching job, started running my own shows. The thing about places like this, Vietnam has only been open to the outside world since like the 90s.
Yeah.
Right. Which is very different from places like Thailand, which is like never closed. You know what I mean? Or, or North Korea, which is never open. It was closed for a little while, but then they opened it up. And so it's still like certain things are kind of like fresh and new here. And meanwhile, if you're a foreigner, and I always kind of want to highlight this because I want expats to realize their privilege, right? Especially expats with passports like mine, which is that you only have to be marginally good at something to make it happen in a place as fertile as Saigon. Marginally good. You know what I mean? And so a lot of people think, that's what privilege does. It makes you think like, oh, I just earned this because I'm great. It's like, no, it's like a lot of happenstance involved in you being able to do what you do. So just realizing that and being for real about that, that's, I won't say enough, but that's a good start, So, because of all these things, I've been able to kind of secure a life for myself here. I'm not sure if I'm answering the question.
Yeah. No, you totally did. And I think that you mentioned something that I like to mention a lot of times on this podcast is sort of the self-awareness depending on where your passport's coming from in the world, right? So there are doors that are affordable and are open to many of us because, quite frankly, we come from places where, because of our education structure, because of our language ability, because of our financial situation, because of all three, because there is a positive bias towards maybe in this case, maybe a Westerner, that we get doors open that other people don't. And so I think you're right, like to acknowledge that and also realize you could still be mediocre. You're just not mediocre. Yes. Like your competition is like back where in the States or Canada or the UK, right? Like that's just all it is. I mean, you might be mediocre. And here's the thing though, like, as long as you understand you're mediocre, I never have a problem with it. It's when you think you're more than mediocre and like, well, I'm just the most amazing here. I'm like, those people don't have a 4-year education. I don't know how you can compare like what you kind of know, because quite honestly, they don't know what you don't know, but I know what you don't know, and therefore you are mediocre.
You got it.
Anyway.
That's so like this is why we're going to be friends. Right. I have, Nas said on Illmatic, he said sleep is the cousin of death. I always say mediocrity is the cousin of privilege.
Oh my God. Okay, so here's a question, and I asked this to Tequila Rose when she was on. As a comedian, first of all, who's your material catering to? Like, what's your audience makeup? Is it Vietnamese? Is it expats? Is it a mix? Who's coming to your shows, your events, your programs?
It's a mix, but it's mostly expats. I would really like a lot more local Vietnamese folks that are tuned into the things that I talk about, because I think there's a lot that they would enjoy of it, because I've gotten some really good reactions. The best reactions, like when I have a local Vietnamese person, if they like one of my jokes, that's like the best feeling. You know, I have some jokes specifically about Vietnam, and I had one Vietnamese dude be like, "No, you really get the culture here," and that just feels amazing. You know, but that said, stand-up comedy it's not traditionally a thing here. There are some new stand-up comics that are starting to emerge. And there was one guy a bunch of years ago that was really popular that he started getting a little bit political, and that didn't fly too well with the authorities here. But it's a relatively new thing. So the audience is mostly expats. Catering to is strong, because I have I think when I started, it was more like I have something to say. Like I have an agenda. Like I was very almost maybe too cognizant and aware that I'm using comedy as a vehicle to talk about political and social issues, and also to air my grievances, you know, and hopefully in a funny way. Whereas now I'm concentrating a little bit more on just being funny, and all that stuff is going to come out naturally because that's who I am. But I had an agenda to the point where it was like, you know, if people's feelings got hurt, I was like, that's okay. You know, not everybody deserves to laugh. That was my credo. You know, some people were really upset by those things you said. Good. Like they was like, no, they don't deserve to laugh. You know, they need to be upset. Whereas like now I'm kind of like, I want to find a way, you know, when I find a way to talk about something that is really close to my heart and important and reach somebody that doesn't necessarily wouldn't have agreed with me before they heard the joke, or maybe doesn't agree with me, but they get it. Like that feels really good. So I'm still like growing and learning a lot.
And even with expat audiences, obviously you come kind of out of an American vein. Do you find that, I mean, and you did a really great job kind of explaining it, even looking at from a Vietnamese perspective, but do you ever have moments where even the jokes you're telling may not even be completely received by other expats or, you know, non-Americans or even Americans? Like, I'm just very interested in terms of, I said this to Keela as well. I'm completely fascinated at the moments that you bomb as a comedian. Like, what often are the reasons you think you bomb? And I think this especially because it looks like you've got an international audience. Like, have you ever had moments where things didn't connect and maybe you could kind of pinpoint why?
So right after the thing happened on January 6th last year, right? The riots, right?
Yeah.
I had a visceral reaction to that whole thing. And then it came out at an open mic, which thankfully I recorded. Thankfully it's recorded. But it was like, It was like I purged, you know what I'm saying? And the basis of it was like, you know, other American expats being like, oh my God, it's so horrible. Did you see what happened? And me being like, good, I'm glad.
Oh, no.
You know, finally, because I've been telling you about this shit for 7 years, you know, and now you want me to be upset that they were beating cops with American flags. I'm like, you know, so that was like, that's the premise of the joke. There's a Jeffrey Dahmer. Anyway, so I had a visceral reaction, and it came out and it did really well.
You just hold on. You just dropped Jeffrey.
So I gotta give it away. So it's like I just fucked up the joke. I should have just told you the joke. But basically,
no, don't even.
But basically, it's like you know when you don't like somebody, but other people like them, and it drives you crazy. where you'd be like, I don't like that dude, man. That dude I work with, man. He's just, people are like, nah, he's cool, man. And you're like, nah, there's something about him. Like, he's just like, I think he's, he's dangerous. Man, he's cool as fuck, man. You know what I'm saying? And you'd be like, all right. And then next day you turn on the news, be like, Milwaukee resident Jeffrey Dahmer accused of killing. And you'd be like, yes, I fucking told you. I wish he ate more people because I like to be right. So that was,
I was like,
yeah. So that's where it went. So I did that. It did really well the night of, because it was about 4 days after it happened that I did that bit. And then I did that bit at another place where it was like really more mixed, like a lot of French folks, and it's a mix of expats and some people, and it's true. Americans think the entire fucking world revolves around us. You know what I mean? Not everybody gives a shit. And also some people are just tired of hearing about it. You know what I mean? I'm sure like expats that are not American are probably close to as glad that Trump didn't get elected, so they don't have to hear about his ass anymore. You know what I mean? So I felt a lot of people pull back on that one. And so that'll happen. I do a lot of stuff about race. I do a lot of stuff about race that asks people to be like self-aware and self-critical. That's not possible for a lot of people. So they get upset. What am I going to do? It's like, if I am going to have fun, I'm going to enjoy myself. I know I'm going to say what I got to say. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, all right, so it is. And I said this, I realized this recently, like the stuff that I do is a calculated risk because it's going to be mostly white folks. You know what I'm saying? So when I'm doing like my racial stuff, it is a calculated risk that I take. But it's like, if I don't get to do that stuff, then I'm not going to. This is the reason I do it, is get to talk about the shit that I want to talk about. That if I'm talking about it in another way, in a non-funny way, apparently if I talk about it in a serious way, then I'm a problem, or what I mean? I'm a drag, So I've written these things that look like jokes so I can talk about them, and people can listen to it for some reason.
I mean, I think you apparently subscribe to my school of thought, which is if I'm amused, that's all that matters. And so I personally,
I understand. I understand that, but I'm gonna tell you one thing, though. I'll tell you one thing. It's hard to be amused when you're supposed to be making people laugh and you're not. You might get by a couple times, but bombing is not fun. Even if you feel like righteously, you know what, I'm right on this. It's just not
on this, and
it's one of the. I mean, I don't know. I don't say it was one of the worst things. I used to be afraid of it, like it was one of the worst things. Now I'm just kind of like, if it happens, I'm just like, all right.
Yeah. It happens.
Yeah, it's an occupational hazard.
I mean, you know what though? I mean, cool point though. Thinking about, especially if your comedy has a bit of a political bent to it. First of all, the fact that when you've got people from so many different places, I think you do run the risk of, okay, this is very American centric. Although because America is in the media, not just in our own media, but like BBC, TV5, like all of them, like DW, like it's so centric that it's like, yeah, we can talk about us all the time. Because let's be honest, we provide much material, right? Like we have enough material that you could probably talk just about the States in whatever form and have material. But like, I do think about, especially when you talk about racial issues, right? Because as we were talking about off air, like every country has their own, like how they approach race. And it's not necessarily, and I always say, especially when you're talking about Black perspectives, it depends on where your Black perspective started, right? Like, so a Black person from the Bay Area has a very unique perspective than a Black person from Ghana,
right?
From Accra, right? Than a Black person from Jamaica, or even a Black person from Atlanta. Black people from Atlanta and Black people from the Bay Area are not the same Black people.
Right.
They just Black. Yeah. They Black in America. And they got some shared being Black in America experiences, but like living in Georgia and living in California and being Black. And so I'm all right. And then so thinking about your comedy in the back of my mind, I was thinking to myself, probably a lot of your expat audience is not Black. And so how do you
not nearly enough?
So how do you approach? Right. So how do you approach not only talking about race from an American perspective and what you've seen and grown up with, but also with groups of folks who may not have even necessarily experienced or have the same cultural reference, if that makes sense? Like, how do you navigate that in terms, or are you just like, look, I'm just going to tell this joke and who gets it?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what's going to work. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know what's going to work before I do it. Sometimes I do something that I think is so good and like, man, and I'll do it 3 times and it's just like, you know, sometimes I'll keep doing it. I have jokes that people that never got a good reaction, but I like them so much. I'm just like, you know, I'm like a gorilla trying to put a square peg in a round hole, just like, just jamming it, you know? But yeah, there's a lot of trial and error. I try to draw parallels. Like, this is what this looks like to me. Like, for example, Southeast Asia is the last bastion of hope for white people with dreadlocks. This isn't even one of my bits, right? I've never said this on stage, but Southeast Asia is the last bastion of hope for white people that want to get away with wearing dreadlocks and not have anybody say boo. Like, what the fuck are you doing?
Wait, is there a reason for this?
It's just like, it's like the backpacking. It's like, it's like the crusty thing.
Oh my
right?
God, I hate crusty. I can't do crusty.
And then there's like reggae. There's like a lot of white people who are like super into reggae music. So I ended up going to this music festival. I don't know if you saw I did a podcast about this recently. This is one of my jokes. And it's basically, I won't go into the whole joke, but it was a music festival where it's all reggae, drum and bass, hip hop, right? All this, right? And there was not one black artist on there. But there's a lot of white folks, you know, doing like big Jamaican voices. And the thing is, there's not enough black people around. At one point, I was hanging out with Angie, who you should also interview, Angie the Diva, and our friend Britt, 2 black folks. And we're sitting there and it's like, okay. And then there's a dude on stage rapping All Right by Kendrick Lamar. Okay. You get me. You get me.
Now, here's the thing. I know at this point I've lost a segment of the audience. Now, here's the deal. Some of you may have been introduced to Kendrick Lamar through the Super Bowl performance. The rest of you know who Kendrick Lamar is. And is that from To Pimp a Butterfly? Is it from that album or was it from Humble? That's from, yeah.
And it's basically, it's basically like the Black Lives Matter anthem.
Because, no, but also he had to change the lines.
Oh, no. He didn't, he left the N-word out. Like, but the whole thing about it is like, he just,
No, you can't just smooth past that. He left it out or he used it. But that's a lot of leaving it out because that chorus is like.
And he didn't say anything. He didn't even change it to like neighbor or something like that. It was weird. But the other thing about it is like, this song is about like how difficult it is to be black in America. But despite all of that, we gonna be all right. We gonna be all right. And he's singing it to like, it's like 98% white people. I'm like, who the fuck are you talking to?
But it's not even a reggae song. This is
the hip hop stage. Once again, this is the hip hop stage. Not a black artist in sight. Not one. But they could get away with it. They could get away with it because there's nobody, you know what I mean? But if I say something, no, because the 3 of us were just looking at each other like word, you know what I mean?
Who want to shut it down? Who want to shut it down?
But then I'm a prop. Then I can't have fun for the rest of the, you know what I'm saying? It's like, you know, and I'm not going to police people like that, but I'm going to talk about you on stage, but I'm going to make some jokes about you.
Can I, when you said the last bastion of dreadlock white people Let me tell you about another band I hated, because this takes me back to the late 90s. You know what I immediately had a vision
Sublime.
of? Do you remember? No,
I like Sublime. I actually like Sublime. Yeah. They got good songs.
I was going to say, I actually like Sublime. No. Do you remember Rusted Root?
God. I saw them. I saw them in concert. I was at a festival and they happened to be playing like in 91 or something like that. They were crusty. But do you know, like, I was like, that's why I'm like, you got a green room. Why didn't you take a shower? What do you got a backstage area? Why are you so funky?
When you said that, I said, oh God, that's like the Rusted Root people. Yeah. Like they're just traveling the world.
Exactly. You got it.
I'm kind of sad I wasn't at this, because I'd have said something. Because I wish you were there. Why not? Since we're all here and we're all friends. No, since we're all friends.
What I realized about myself, like I am, one of my faults is that I can be very like spiteful in the sense that I will let somebody do something to me that I don't like. You know what I'm saying? I will let them go through with it just so I could be like this, you know, so I can have that on them. And also I know I'm going to turn it into material. I know I'm going to, you know, I'm going to make a joke. I create something.
I'm sorry. I can't with this event. This is like
unreal.
Oh my God. I can see it too. And I ain't never been to Southeast Asia. Closest I got was Singapore.
No,
and Singapore ain't this.
And the thing is, nobody's going to check them. Nope. And that's why they can do it. Cause there's nobody to be like, what are you doing? You know what I'm saying? And I had one of them like just go in and explain to me like he's not Rastafarian, but he like, you know, it's the call it like all this stuff. I'm like, okay. Still telling my joke. And I've had people walk out. I've had people walk out on this joke. I've had people walk out on this joke and complain to the management. You know, they didn't like what I had to say. I'm like, you didn't like what I had to say about like an actual thing that happened? You didn't like me talking about my lived experience? Okay.
Why were they the Rusted Root people unoffended?
Yeah, I think they were of that ilk. Yeah.
I mean, we see you coming though. Like everybody,
no.
Sorry. I've known a couple. Like, so.
It's like the funny thing about it is if they were doing the same music, and let's say like 100 actual black people walked in there, they would feel funny. You know what I'm saying? They would be like, you know, I always talk about that scene from, you've seen Office Space, the scene when the dude is rapping to Scarface.
Yes.
And the black dude comes and he like rolls up his windows like, oh, fuck, there's a real one now. You know what I mean?
Well, this goes back to what you were saying about mediocrity.
Yeah. You can get away with that.
You can get away with it when people don't know, but I'm stuck on the song choice because that's the wildest song. Like, you could, at this point, bro, you could have said, say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud, because there's so many other songs. I mean, here's the thing. You could take it back to 93. You could have done a Snow song and could have done Informer, and they were closed then anyway. So you could have done Informer.
Yeah.
And ain't nobody got to know. And you could have been like, that's me in the video. And they'd have been like, that is you in the video. And hey, I like Snow in 92, so I'm not fronting, but you could have done,
they could have changed it to
Imposter. There were some folks you could have bid off.
They could have changed Informer and changed the lyrics a little bit.
And they're probably too young, but they didn't know. You had some benchmarks or some go-tos that you didn't go to.
They went all the way to the,
they went all the way to, they went to Kendrick. Oh my God. And so, wow, that's one of the reasons I do comedy. Stuff like that. Cause if I didn't do comedy, I would just be angry. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know, when you get so mad about something and like maybe you don't speak up for yourself, and now it's 2 weeks later and you're washing the dishes, having a conversation with somebody that's not actually there.
obviously you're winning the argument because it's happening in your mind, right?
Right. And you have the best comeback, right? That you didn't say 2 weeks prior. It's always like, oh, wait, I should have said it.
I can't live like that. I'm going to say it on stage.
You've just listened to an episode of The Global Chatter, which is hosted by me, Amanda Bates. It is edited by Stephanie Ficcio. Don't forget to subscribe to The Global Chatter on your favorite podcast platform. You can also follow us on Instagram at The Global Chatter, or stop by Twitter and find us at Global Chat Pod. If you have a question, want to subscribe to the newsletter, or are interested in sponsoring, visit theglobalchatter.com.